All right, Zig coming in on the top. Today on the show, we have Julian Shah-Tayler of the Singularity. Julian is a singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and producer. Julian has a new album out called Illusium. It's available on all streaming platforms. We're going to hear a tune off it in a little bit. It's an incredibly done record. There's a lot of featured talent on it, one of which being David J. If you guys have listened back in October, we talked to his whole new band, the Night Crickets, David J., Victor from Violent Femmes, and Darwin Miners. And Julian's done a lot of work with all three. He was actually on the Night Crickets record as well. And that's how we started talking. So if you're into that, go back in the catalog, check out. I did an interview with each member, and we'd really dive into that record. And this is kind of an extension of it. But anyway, Julian is an incredibly talented musician. We're going to listen to one of his tunes, and like the first thing when I started listening to his music is, man, this guy's like Bowie-esque. In like the best way. Like his voice is incredible. It resonates with these Bowie tones, but it's uniquely his own. So we're going to listen to a song he did with David J. This is a tune called The Devil Knows. Check it.
I don't belong to you. Try.
Devil Knows off the album Illusium. Julian Shah-Tayler. The Singularity. Available on all the streaming platforms. This episode was recorded in classic Zig at the Gig fashion. It was recorded in my van before a gig. And during this episode, I talked with Julian about some kind of producing mindsets, right? The philosophical, the psychological needs and like exercises one does once, like producing and editing and mixing their own music. And I bring up an example of a tune I've been working on and going back and forth between a master that had like a slight amount of reverb, which makes no difference to anyone else in the world. But anywho, that song, we put it out. I play in a band called C Level, letter C dash Level. We are a funk punk reggae rock group based out of Cleveland. We take acoustic guitars and run them through Marshall amps and have a high energy aspect to us. And we put out a song called DIYs and Open Mics. It's on all streaming platforms. And it features our dear friends Leah Mara and the Dreamcatchers. So if you endure my canter and you're like, he might be musically interesting, if you check us out at c-level44.com or any of the streaming platforms at c-level, you might dig the tune. Anyway, before I get to the podcast, if you guys can like, subscribe, rate, review the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep getting cool insights from amazing artists like Julian and sharing them with you. And with that being said, let's get into this conversation. Here's me and Julian. To kind of get into it, that's like how often? When was the last time we went to Australia?
We were there just before the pandemic.
Yeah.
It was 2019, in fact, it was around the same time in 2019. And then they booked us to come back on 2020. And then, of course, the entire world imploded. So that didn't happen. But yeah, it was a really good show. We sold out pretty much all the way around. We sold out in 4 of the markets in Australia and then 2 in New Zealand, because we went to New Zealand as well. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But this time we're not going to New Zealand, which feels a bit silly because it's an easy hop skip.
Right, you're already there.
Yeah, and they wanted us, so I don't know what's going on with the promoters. But anyway,
well, that'll be the other leg. We have to go to Australia again because we're in New Zealand.
Well, right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, the funny thing about that is my fiance is from New Zealand, and we were gonna piggyback the trip to go and visit her family and all that stuff, but I guess that didn't happen, and maybe there's a good reason for that. You never know.
That's true. But this new album's amazing. I've gone back and forth through it, like maybe since you sent me the link, like a bunch, and I was like, holy shit! Like the production, the songwriting, the performance, all of it. It's so good.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So,
yes,
I was gonna say, to get to this leg, because I didn't have a chance to listen to everything, but I was going through your discography. I'm like, man, it's been a hustle. It's been a nonstop hustle, and clearly shows in this album that you've been at it for a long time and have been adamant about doing it. But So with the kind of current project and current, like, well, at least with this current record, let's kind of get some backstory up into that. So music within your family, like, was music around your family? Were you a musical child?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
My grandmother was. I was raised by my grandmother because, you know, without going into details, I was raised by my grandmother. So she was a music teacher,
Oh, okay.
and she married my grandfather, and he sort of got her into business, and so she was a business person, and they were doing business, and she wasn't doing teaching, she wasn't, you know, interacting with kids, she wasn't doing what her heart really told her. So she poured all that into me, really, and decided, you know, to help me learn French and to taught me piano from the age of 5, and sent me to I went to boarding school. I went to a cathedral choir school in the north of England, which subsequently became the location for Hogwarts.
Huh. That's cool. Yeah.
Legitimately,
You went to
I
Hogwarts.
legitimately went to Hogwarts. So
That's awesome.
no magical spells. I was clearly a squib. But yeah, it was. I mean, you know, people ask me about, oh no, what was boarding school like? And of course, you know, I don't know. It was what I knew, so
Yeah.
it was fine. I know a lot of people who were quite damaged by their experience in boarding school, like Roger Waters, for example.
Right.
But but I didn't know any different, and I enjoyed myself. I thought it was fine. So yeah, so she kind of encouraged all that. She wasn't religious at all, not as I'm not religious. I mean, I believe in, you know, that I'm probably not the end of the world, just me, but also I couldn't ascribe to any specific faith patterns. But they didn't force it on us, weirdly. It's like there was no sense in a boarding school, which is ostensibly a religious school. They didn't
Right.
really make us be religious in any way. So
That's probably what made it much more durable, doable, like, is not having that kind of extra, like, but, if you go into something like that, and it sounds like growing up with your grandmother, it was more, if you're more matured at that point in your life, I feel like that experience isn't going to be too jarring. If you're kind of confident with yourself a little bit and like ready to handle living on your own to some degree.
well, yeah, I mean, you know, I was 7, and
Yeah.
that's a lot of people feel that makes them feel a bit sad that, you know, you send a 7-year-old, because I have a little girl at the moment. She's just coming to 8.
Yeah.
There is no way I could imagine her not actually. She would thrive. She's incredibly intelligent, and you know, very able, but I wouldn't send her to boarding school. That would be ludicrous. Like that little face just, you know, disappearing amongst all the older kids. Now I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But for me, you know, because it was my grandmother raising me, I mean, I feel like she made me very mature for my age. So I felt okay with it, I guess. You know, it's like, this is the next step. I'm getting older.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they taught me music. You know, I mean, there was, you know, church organ, piano, singing, violin, clarinet, flute. Like I did all that stuff at a very early age, classically. So
So like reading like that, well, it's kind of like if your like adult figure like kind of talks to you like an adult, growing up, that makes sense that like it'd be like that next step would be no big jarring experience. Does that you know what I mean? Like if you're kind of already in that headspace, but with music, um, jumping on each instrument like that at a very young age and just jumping into like the flexibility of, oh, I'm playing whatever, is also like a super like incredible thing. So like when you like, I mean, it sounds like piano was the main, but like getting a different view of each instrument. I mean, I imagine that plays in like going through this record, like how much of it like, because there's so many different things going on. Like, did you like? I know you reached out, and the credits have within the album have it's not just you on everything, but like as far as like writing, did you kind of like narrate some of the pieces that were written on here, or dictate what the other players did?
no, I mean,
Okay.
the only people who were on the record that really sort of that contributed in a fundamental way were, I guess, the track listing on the record. I mean, I have David's on there,
Yeah.
obviously, and he played to what was already there.
Okay. So
There
it was
was
already
no,
laid out. Got it.
yeah, it was already written. I mean, honestly, I worked with David quite a lot. I
Yeah.
mean, I played a little bit of keyboards on the new Night Crickets, just as a
Oh,
sidebar.
yeah?
Yeah,
Nice.
I mean, it's just a little bit though.
Yeah.
Normally, I'm a lot more sort of, interactive with him and Darwin. Darwin's a very good friend of mine. I produced Darwin's last album.
Yeah? Nice.
Yeah,
Well,
but
put a pin
but
in that. We'll come back to that.
oh, okay, sure. But no, so David came along and played bass over something that was already existing, but it was actually MGT that I'd reached out to. So there's actually now 3 versions of Devil Knows. There's a version that is the Ruby Rock version, which came out on the single in 2020, which has Mark Slutsky on drums. MGT, like his entire thing, it's his production basically. So he's playing the guitars all the way through. David's playing bass, Mark's on drums, and then I'm just basically singing. I took pretty much everything that I did musically out. But this one on the album is a hybrid. So I took the best of parts of what MGT had played, in my opinion, and then I added like things that I wanted to do with it. So I wanted to like have it as a collaborative thing, as though we'd come up with it as a band. And in some ways it's a jigsaw of the song. So, there's David on bass for certain bits, and then I'm playing the bass from my version of it on other bits, because the MGT version, as I want to call it, lends itself more to just straight ahead rock, where it's people in a room. And of course I do everything on my own in the studio. So when somebody comes in with something that sounds live and exciting, it's great for me. But sometimes I want to add things that I did and sort of hybridize. So I did that with Devil Knows, and then also with Evolution, which MGT is also on.
Okay.
He came to my studio for that session, and he added, because it's such a heavily electronic song.
Yeah.
He added pieces which kind of sounded like a little bit like, I guess, Robert Smith soloing over The Cure, and it didn't work all the way through the song. I mean, I've actually I've got a vinyl which is slated to come out, and I've put a lot more of MGT's playing on it, because I took out all the keyboards, and I was just like, okay, now this works. So there is a version.
Okay. Yeah.
Sort of remix coming out on the vinyl eventually. But as far as the rest of the album, like songs like Earthquakes, Bet Your Life, Darker Than You, it's like that's all just me playing with myself.
Yeah. Well, so that kind of makes sense to jump back in the past a little bit. So learning all these different like aspects of music, like jumping from violin, jumping from piano, like to have that kind of different gauge and where these instruments fit in orchestra kind of primes the brain to think like that for when you're writing later. So when did?
Oh, sure. Yeah, good observation.
That's like, when did you start singing?
I was around 5. I mean, my grandmother was,
Yeah.
encouraging me to sing in school, and so I'd get up in front of the class when I was 5, and that was my first performance. Then, of course, I'm 7. I'm singing in front of thousands of people in the church cathedral. So I've been singing a long time.
So, because man, your voice is amazing. Like I listened to this record and like I was like, I'm sure you've got the David Bowie note before, like where you got that, who? You got a little hint of Bowie in your voice, but like it's so pure, and the tones, like as someone who spent a super long time later in life trying to figure out how to sing, you know what I mean? Like there's something so natural about your performance, and just like listening to like this whole record and hearing how it fits in all these different aspects. It's like it's a full tone, and it's pure, and you can feel it. Like so that makes sense that it would have started since 5. Like,
yeah, well, thank you. I'm definitely. I mean, I really love, for example, like Neil Young. And there's no way that Neil Young has influenced this record, but I love the way he used around the time of Harvest and after the Gold Rush, he used very textural and very close harmonies.
yeah.
Like, he used to stack. There's a song called New Mama, which I think is from actually maybe the one before, After the Gold Rush, and it's just the end of the song is just the four or five of them just singing in close harmony, and it is absolutely stunning. Like I definitely like stacking vocals, and certain vocals, like the main vocal can be a dark baritone Bowie thing, but then the high vocal needs to be a sort of a more airy Liz Fraser vibe. So I do try to kind of like differentiate between vocal tones and textures when I'm doing, when I'm threading, because as I say, vocally there are no backing vocals except my own, and I do sometimes work with Durga McBroom, who used to sing with Pink Floyd. I sometimes get her in on my stuff.
Oh, no way. Cool.
Yeah, she's
Yeah.
she's great, but her texture is so unattainable. I could not attain that texture. There's no way, not with the studio trickery, no nothing. She is the guttural, throaty gospel goddess.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in that when you can really like tune the craft, when you can take your voice and you fully like kind of learn your range and where you sit and how to make that the purest it can be. It's like learning those weird alterations of how to like twist your soft palate to make it sound like airy, or make it, what I mean, they make
Right.
it get those hints of whatever, and like that make for harmonies, like you're saying, that's crucial, because like if it all
Absolutely.
just sounds like you, it's just a wall of you. But if you can add that accent, that's, in those little spices of different tonality.
I mean, well, I try, and obviously you're very, very well aware of. I mean, I was a singing teacher for a while, so the physiognomy of singing is adjustable. I mean, you can make yourself sound like. I mean, obviously, I work in tribute, so I can do literally a Bowie voice that sounds more like Bowie than I would normally sound. But honestly, I'm not putting it on the record. I mean, that is how my voice normally sounds.
Yeah.
But then I can go full Bowie if I want to. Because it is about, you look at somebody's face and you see sort of the size and dynamic of the nose versus the
Right.
chest and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, and that is something that's worth observing, especially in the world of tribute, because you look at them and you say, okay, well, I need to pinch my nose. I need to be conscious of the size of my nose and pinch it in to be a bit more like Grace Slick, for
Yeah.
example, like, because those the organ itself is the amplifier of the voice. The voice is just the resonance of the vocal cords, right? But the
Yeah.
actual face, like Freddie Mercury would not have had that voice without those enormous teeth.
Right. Right. And like that's what makes, I don't know, like with vocalizing anything, it's such like a, I feel like it's such a personal, and like it's so easy to be kind of like terrified of it, because it's putting yourself out there. It's the one thing you have that no one else has, is your set of pipes, and like
Right.
like how everything about you alters that tone. And I think that's what makes people so afraid to get up and sing, or to be expressive like that. But
Because it's very vulnerable, isn't it? I
yes,
mean,
yes.
there's something quite vulnerable. I don't feel the vulnerability. You see, it's like I'll sing, and I'll sing badly, and I don't care. Like if I have
Yeah.
a cold and I get up at karaoke and I sing badly, I'm just not worried about what. See, that's the difference. People, certainly in America, I understand that public speaking is one of the main fears of people in America, and it's because they're worried about being judged, or they're worried about people disagreeing with them, or they're worried. I, and honestly, America is one of the most open-minded and most welcoming countries in the world to do
Yeah.
creative stuff. So it's strange to me that would be the big fear, because I mean, and as I say, I don't care. It's like I'll get up there and I'll do what I do, and if people like it, then great. If they don't like it, then they can go fuck themselves. I don't give. I
Yeah.
don't give. Because honestly, the world is not full of your people. There are certain people in the world that you're going to resonate with, and then everybody else is either going to be indifferent or hate you.
Yeah.
So just find your people. That's the most important thing.
I think that's well said too, because so many people get caught up in everything being perfect and right and appeasing to everybody, and like it takes. I think definitely, singing at 5, and just being in front of people, especially in like in school, and having that kind of comfortability with like, I can do this and it sounds like that. so much of just being comfortable with what you can do and what you sound like, and that makes, I think, discovering yourself easier. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like I fell into music in like high school, and like I just went down the rabbit hole of putting myself in the tape recorder and like I could never like really just knowing I could do it better, and just having that kind of like self check in that sense helped with everything else and helped me like self analyze. You know,
Right.
I wish I did that when I was like your age, younger, like starting to do that through all of education, because I would have got a lot more ready sooner. I think, I don't know, but
Well,
everything
it's
happens, for a reason.
I really like David's attitude towards things. I mean, I record with him a lot, and when he comes in the studio, and it's when if he's got a song prepared, which is often, he will just come in and he'll just do a take,
Yeah.
and that's the one that's on the record,
Huh.
because there's a certain degree of it's like he wants to bottle the lightning,
Right.
and or capture lightning in a bottle. Sorry, that's more elegant way of phrasing it. And oftentimes, the best one that you ever get is the one where you're just figuring it out. It's just outside your comfort zone. And as soon as you start overthinking it, and as soon as you start re-recording that section, that segment that you've perfected, then you're missing it, and the magic has sort of disappeared, because it's more fluid and it's more flat and rounded. Whereas now with with a lot of my stuff, what I used to do is I used to loop. I used to find a good riff and I used to loop it, and because I was in a band, an electronic rock band, was quite successful in the early 2000s, and we looped. We took something, we looped it up. It was almost like sampling the instruments and then recreating something. So I got used to doing that, and then I realized the brain picks up on lack of variation, and it
Yeah.
becomes something other than it is. Now, I'm an accomplished instrumentalist in different contexts, like piano and guitar and vocals, whatever. So instead of looping it, once I've written the song and the loop may or may not be in there, I will then re-record everything all the way through. And if there's a mistake, I will assess that mistake and see whether it improves the song or whether I need to redo it. But sometimes I'll leave the mistakes in. Like if you listen to Earthquakes, for example, I had a version of Earthquakes without Rhodes on it. And I listened to this version. It was just guitar and bass, and it was quite skeletal, and I liked it. It was great. I was very pleased with it. And then I realized I wanted it to be a smooth song. I wanted it to sound pretty and beautiful, because it's a song about the love of my life. I mean, the album is written about the love of my life and how I met her and how the relationship developed, and it's a narrative. Like if you really sort of, I could tell the story, and I probably will at some point as a sort of YouTube or something, but I wanted it, suddenly I was like, okay, I want to smooth this out, I want it to be loving, and so I just played it on the Rhodes once. So there's nothing on that. There's no retakes, nothing on that Rhodes part, and I didn't really remember the chords, because this is months after I'd written it, and I just felt, okay, well, there's a bit of wiggle in it. It's not right on the grid. It's not perfectly in time, and there are certain notes which should probably not be the right notes, but it worked.
Right.
And there's something magical about that. And then working with David taught me that, because he is never one to correct. Like we've done, 6, 7 songs at this point, where I think it's going to be the first side of his new album, solo album.
Yeah.
Most of the vocals there are one take vocals. We'll drop in for the most egregious tuning issue, but most of it is one take vocals, because David wants that. That's what defines him, is that the magical quality with a K.
Well, he definitely, like, when I spoke with him, he's got that vibe. He's just, and just the stories he kind of got into when I was talking with him, like, it really does seem spur of the moment. And there's something to someone, and I think that's a great degree of practice beforehand. You know what I mean? Getting comfortable and getting, like, in tune with yourself and in tune with your creativity, that you can just do it whenever. and get to that point where like it has, it's right now, because if not, it gets worse. It takes that practice of learning that it gets worse when you think about it too much.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not Max Martin here. We're not
Yeah.
crafting, Britney's comeback single. This is art. And I
Yeah.
think, have you read David's book?
I haven't read his book. When I talked with him, like, I didn't know he had a book out until like afterwards. I was like, shit, that would have definitely, like, I dove pretty deep into like everything I could find, like new article wise and like audio wise. And then like you get through, because he's got so many solo records, and you get through those and you're like, wait, shit, there's a book. I'm talking with him soon. But I know he's got it. I just haven't gotten into it yet. But not to cut you off.
Oh, I recommend it. It's fascinating, and he's a very interesting character. It's one of his good friends, and I knew they worked together because there are a lot of synchronicities between me and David. Like I did a video for a song. The way he sort of got to know me as a producer is Darwin asked me to do a song for his Kanreki CD, which is, I think that's a Japanese word for 60th birthday. I want to say 60th birthday CD. So I did a song. I did a cover of one of David's songs, and he really loved it. He loved my cover. So that's one of the things that started us working together. And the video I put to the song, I cut up the only movie that Alan Moore, the comic book writer, has ever made. I cut it up and put it to this song that I'd done without knowing at all that David was good friends with Alan Moore.
Yeah.
and that was just a really weird synchronicity. It's like a magical moment where he saw the video. He's like, "Oh, Julian, great video. I'm good friends with Alan." And I'm like, "Oh, fuck, really?" Because Alan Moore is one of my huge heroes.
Yeah? Did he link you guys up somehow?
Not yet. I mean, Alan doesn't fly, so
he's pretty.
I would, if I ever go to Northampton and I happen to be around there, which is honestly a little unlikely because it's not the most auspicious town in England.
Right.
But if I ever do, I will definitely ask David to hook me up, because fuck yeah, would I do a magical celebration with Alan Moore? Yeah, of course.
He's so sick. Wow, he seems like it's such like the kind of like inspiration in the moment type of like creator, like in like thinker, like because I remember hearing about the Alan Moore bit with I forget which interview or which article, and I remember him talking about this album and receiving this album on his birthday and being like so moved that so many, that what a touching 60th birthday gift. Do you know what I mean? How cool is that?
Oh, that's wonderful. I mean, I thank Darwin for that, because Darwin is a great connector.
Yeah.
And a marvelous guy, and a great songwriter, particularly good lyricist. And yeah, I loved working with him. I mean, as I say, I think I did a remix for him initially, and then he asked me to produce the whole album. And it was a collaboration, honestly. Same with David. It's like when we work together, more so with Darwin, because David is a bit more of a control freak than Darwin is. But actually, that's not fair. He's not a control freak at all. But he's got a more solid idea of where something's going to go before we start working on it. Whereas Darwin just said to me, you go ahead, do what you would do. And I really dug into that record. I feel very proud of it. And I feel, there's no other sort of collaboration that would have rendered that same result than mine and Darwin. So I'm proud of it. Did you hear the So Few Comets album?
Yeah. No, when I was diving through his stuff to get ready to talk with Darwin, it's a great work. So like, did you meet Darwin first before David, right? And how did you meet Darwin? Just reaching out?
No, weirdly, I met David. David was when I first moved to LA. I had a band. It was under my name, I think Shah. I think it was called, or just Julian or Shah-Tayler or whatever. And David, my friend who was a drummer called Shock, who is a sort of the stalwart LA goth connector. So all the goths in LA know Shock, and Shock's worked with everybody. And he was working with David at the time. And he brought David to my show for whatever reason. And David came up to me after the show and was like, "Oh, Julian, very impressed, very impressed. Yeah, definitely loved it." And I had no idea who he was. Honestly. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd always known about Bauhaus, but I wasn't a huge fan. I kind of I associated Bauhaus with a bunch of people in Nottingham, because I used to live in Nottingham in England, and they were all heroin addicts, and they were Bauhaus fanatics. So I always associated Bauhaus with a very dark,
Yeah.
like squatters on heroin,
Huh.
and that was, although I loved the music, it was great. And of course, the first time I ever heard Ziggy Stardust was by Bauhaus. So I appreciated them and knew that they were great. But then when I met David, it was like, oh, it's the bass player from Bauhaus. So what? And, then obviously, I got to know Darwin about 10 years later, honestly. Darwin was managing David, and I said, "Oh, I met David," because I was quoting David on my press release, because obviously then I realized Bauhaus have this great history, and they're very well respected by everybody, like everybody in the world, not just the goths. And then I dived a little bit further into their catalog, and I love goth, but I really love melody, and I feel Bauhaus don't have a lot of melody in what they do. It's all about the live show, and it's all about the feeling,
Right.
which I get 100% now. But at the time, I was diving into Bauhaus. I was like, yeah, okay, I love it. It's great. It's very cool and edgy. But because I work from home in my home studio, writing on an acoustic guitar,
Right.
now, there could not really be anything more far removed from that than the band jamming
Yeah.
together. So
Yeah.
though I respected it, I didn't get it. And then I saw them play a couple of years ago, before the pandemic, with Peter. I mean, sorry, with the whole band, was Bauhaus at the Hollywood Palladium, and my God, they were spectacular. And I ate my words. I was just like, this is fabulous. And then I saw them at Cruel World as well, and again, it was just fabulous. There's no, they have no peers live in that context. So
Well, and that's the thing, like with any, it's a beautiful thing about music is like with any artist, like there's always a different aspect that you either see or don't see when you dive into someone, which makes it really hard to like. Live is always going to be fully encompassing because like you're there, you know. But like it's interesting, and like as you study and write and like work on your own thing, it's like those things come out later that you appreciate. Like the idea of writing by yourself is really, really far removed from how Bauhaus did their stuff because they're that unit, and
mhm.
writing as a unit is so different, and it's
Oh,
almost
sure.
I mean, it's harder to do because there's more yes and no people in the I don't like that. That sounds too much like it's so hard to get anything done with a group of people, let alone express yourself as a unit. Like,
And that with Bauhaus specifically, like, because there are no hits. I mean, let's be honest, they didn't have any hit songs. They had, obviously very famous
right,
songs like
right,
Bella Lugosi's Dead. But how do you determine as a group the exact perfection of Terra Couple Kill Colonel,
right.
for example? Like, how do you know, as four totally diverse people, that is genius? I mean, because I watch it and I'm like, that is genius. But if I was in a rehearsal
Yeah.
room, I would be desperately searching for a hook,
Right.
for example, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and
And
like, sorry.
but I'm not saying there isn't any hooks. It's
Yeah.
just they are so avant-garde and so cool and so arty that the four of them together coming to that conclusion musically is what was brilliant about Bauhaus. And I appreciate that. And then of course, Love and Rockets is a totally different thing. That is
Right.
then song based.
Yeah.
They're bringing all the pop back into that context, and it's a totally different thing. It could be two completely different bands.
I couldn't agree more because and also it kind of tracks the kind of like creativity uh like growth in a way. It's like you start writing when you start writing, you just start kind of putting stuff together. You don't really maybe make it the final draft. You do one draft, and like it's almost full circle from what we talked about a little bit ago. Like when you write a song, like you kind of examine it and you're trying to make it better and rewrite it, yada yada. And then you get to a point where you just write it once and record it once. You know what I mean? It's like the full circle of like starting, just doing something, moving on. Then, well, maybe I don't just start and do something. I really hone it and like hack away at it. Maybe I hold on to that, add another part a few days later. You just spend more time thinking about this expression. And then
Right.
it's like where you guys are at now, where it's just like hit record. I think this is it. Like.
Yeah, but isn't that wonderful? I mean,
Is.
I used to be in a band like that when I was first in London,
Yeah.
and we kind of like swayed, I guess is probably the best analogy. Like I was a huge Suede fan, and we would do that jamming thing, but then I'd take everything home, craft it, bring it back in, and then we'd sort of like incorporate the jam, but I would have to direct it,
Right.
because I only know pop. I only know how to popify something. I can't allow it to be art. Do you know what I mean? It's weird. It's like a proclivity where, I don't wish to blow my own horn, but I feel like on the record, on Elysium, every song has a hook and a definitive chorus.
Yeah.
And it's not my intention to be so sort of obvious sometimes. Like one of the songs on the album, I won't mention which one it was, my grandmother loved it. It was her favorite song I ever wrote. And it feels like the most obvious pop song I've ever written. And, I'm sort of not embarrassed about it at all. It's just like when I remember when The Cure came out with Friday I'm in Love, I remember my heart sank. I don't know why, because obviously that's their biggest moment, and the thing that reached most people in the world with this genius band that deserves all the success in the world. Yet I knew that was their kind of creative nadir, and that they would never be the same again, and they weren't.
Yeah, there's definitely like I don't know, but I think like because part of like our ears want that in it. You know what I mean? Like. There's definitely, I'm sure, some people that don't want to hear anything remotely close to a hook or a resolved melody. Some people reside in dissonance, and like that's what they're going for. But
like pre-Goo Sonic Youth, for example.
Right, and definitely pre-Goo. But it's like, but there's a. I think it's a balance. At least for myself, I like a balance. I like the punk edge to it, but I'd like to be able to sing it, and I like to be able to have a hook for that narrative.
Like Buzzcocks.
Yeah, Buzzcocks is a great example.
Yeah, I mean, they have the buzzsaw guitar, Buzzcocks. They have that sawing style guitar and the aggression, but they also have these beautiful pop melodies, and it's almost like it's almost like the Beatles with filtered through the punk movement, isn't it? And I love that about them. But then again, I love some Sex Pistols. I guess the Pistols also had pop.
Yeah, totally. You can totally sing "God Save the Queen," or like there's and that, or even like the Ramones. The Ramones are very poppy,
Mm-hmm.
But
the Ramones were deliberately so. I mean, they wanted to be Motown, didn't they? They wanted to be Phil Spector. They wanted that whole thing. Because I mean, at the end of the day, and this is a controversial thing to say, especially in the punky fraternity that I have been party to in the past, is that you should want success. You should want fame. You should want to be recognized, because if you don't, people won't work with you and they won't pay you for what you do.
For sure.
That's a really important factor,
Right. Well, even just like doing what you're doing and expressing yourself, like if all you're doing is doing that for your sake, like it's kind of, that's where it gets to be a little arrogant in a way. If you're doing it in a way where it's kind of like inspiring others and you get to express yourself, which comes with a little bit of success, it turns that narrative at least to not as much of a selfish endeavor. So I totally agree. A little success is going to definitely make that heard and make you a example as opposed to a.
The thing that I want and always wanted with my music, and I think that most musicians would have to admit this to themselves at least, is connection. I want to connect with people. I want to find my tribe. I want to find the people who say, hey, wow, this guy sounds a bit like Bowie, and this chord change is very swayed. And my God, there's a Depeche Mode sound here. I love this. This is great. This is right in my lane, because those people are the people that I would connect with if I were to meet them on the street and say, hi, how are you? They're not going to be country and western people, because they're not my tribe, and not to be disparaging
Right.
of that at all, but I want connection with people, so I make music with that expressly in mind. Do I do it from a very sort of solipsistic, intellectually rigorous way on my terms? Yes, I do. But that's because most of the people that I connect with are a little bit like that.
Yeah.
And that's okay. It's
Totally.
like it's okay to admit you're a musical elitist, for example. But I mean, I don't think I'm a musical elitist necessarily, but I do like things to be a little bit of everything, and intellectually rigorous, and a bit sexy, and a bit dancey. And when I hear that in other bands, I get really excited. And I don't feel there's a lot of that around at the moment, because the lanes are so blurred,
Yeah.
and the lanes are so sort of open. Like you look at Spotify, how many releases they get every week? A million releases. There's no path to excellence, because you're always competing with a very how can I put it,
Wide.
wide and flash in the pan.
Right.
Like, if it's all about playlists, where does the album live?
Right.
Like, I mean, like, it's like watching an advert as opposed to a movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, the kind of like, I mean, that that kind of makes sense to kind of backtrack if you kind of grew up from like playing all these different instruments and like reading music and like having all these different insights with music. To me, that makes sense that you would have like this need to have like this kind of intellectual approach, but also like has to groove and has to have these certain things like. Because music can be complicated and specific, but people are that way too, And music's
Yeah.
made for people, like
Oh,
so.
absolutely. Yeah. I can't. There are very few sort of people of limited scope that enjoy what I do. Don't get it. It doesn't reach them. It's like it's like Radiohead. Like Radiohead, such a lucky band. I love
Right.
Radiohead. Probably my favorite band. They had the Dum Dums' first single, and they're not to be disparaging, but
Yeah.
Creep is a very obvious song. It's very simply written, and it's beautiful, but it is by far and away not their best work. And they had the opportunity from that one song to develop, and my God, they developed on the Bends. Like, the Bends was
That's a great record.
it's an absolutely spectacular record. And then OK Computer, it's like, but they just going back down into this rabbit hole of weird, but they still took,
Yeah.
like, everybody in the music world who has a discerning musical palette cannot but love Radiohead, in my opinion. I mean, because they've pushed the envelope, and they've been allowed to, because they reached out beyond that, the ivory tower
Right.
initially.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it was like Kid A, and then you're like, oh, where are we going? And like, but that worked because of their like exponential growth up through like OK Computer, and like kept bringing people into that kind of like bigger thought, you know,
and and
musically.
and and I feel like, educated people on music that's fascinating, like Black Dog Recordings or Warp, Otekra, Aphex Twin, like all of those bands that I was into before Kid A, suddenly they become, touchstones for people who would normally like be chanting Oasis songs at football matches,
Yeah.
and that again, I love Oasis too, so I don't want to make that sound like it's disparaging, but Radiohead were hand holding people through
Yeah.
these deeper forms of expression. I really appreciate that. It's like reading a novel by Nabokov, where he's doing something spectacular with language, but the story is also kind of weird and cool and simple. It's like, Radiohead are a pop band, in my opinion. They're just a pop band with great influences.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's well said because you're right. Like, they hit so many things that are very catchy. And, like, it's interesting. I wonder if if it was their natural progression as a band moving through that, or if they kind of had to, like, picture each record where they wanted to go and how they wanted to expand. Because I've never, I mean, that would be really, because if that's the case, if they're writing that novel in that way, bringing you like almost tiered learning, like
Yeah, I think
that's
so. I
pretty
think so.
profound.
I've definitely, had some interviews with, or listened to some interviews with Tom, and I think
Yeah.
that's exactly how they do it. Like for me, when I write an album, like this is the first album I feel I've been cohesive in my approach to it, because I've done around 12 full albums at this point, and nobody knows or cares. but this one I've finally settled on it. It was a topic and a sonic palette, and I have strayed from the sonic palette of that, because there's some songs are just, there's only guitars on there, and then there's one song, Darkling You, which is the one that finishes the record, which is basically Nine Inch Nails offcut.
Yeah. Definitely got
and
that vibe to it.
so that there is a very large variation, but it is sonically more coherent than some of my other stuff, and also simpler, which might surprise you, because it's not that simple in sonically. But yeah, I mean, I definitely, for this one, it was good to have a framework, a skeleton to hang the songs on. Like I had a very specific target on what I was going to do, and it's been the last 3 to 4 years I've been writing these songs, and they all form a narrative, so they are along the same lines mostly, and that's very useful to have, because if you're in a band and they just make one sound, like if you're in Bauhaus, they are going to sound like Bauhaus.
Right.
But if you're doing it all from the home studio on your own, you have every option in the world, because you can play with string arrangements, you can play with synths, you can play with gamelan orchestras from, Java, because you have everything. I mean, we're privileged, right? In this day and age. Are you a music producer as well?
I work with I work with a guy when my band records, and like we'll add stuff together. Like I haven't learned how to as far as like, I mean, produce and thought, like, oh, can we get that on there? Oh, that's how you do that? Okay, yeah, keep doing that. Like I play a lot of stringed instruments, and kind of got that headspace, right? And like and same with like vocals and stuff, but as far as like producing music, aside from like, hey, can we get that on there? Aside for directing, I don't know as much as like actual like how to work the programs or whatever, or like if that makes sense. Like
You're more of a youth style producer, because that's what youth does. He's in and he sort of puts crystals on the desk, and then like percolates the ideas and directs, but doesn't really hands-on engineer, I think.
Yeah, that would be a good way to put it. Like, I think we can let's add a harmony here. Can that work? Let's try it anyway. Like, see,
Yeah,
that
no,
kind of
absolutely.
works.
But that's a very specific style of production, isn't it? It's like you don't need to actually be a musician. I'm good friends with Nick Launay, who's a producer who produces a lot of like Yeahs, Arcade Fire,
Cool. Yeah.
all those guys, and he's not really a musician. He actually makes it his mission to not be musically involved with the record at all. He just directs and gives ideas and captures moments. And I like that. I think that's a good approach. And I would love to work with a producer like that, where I don't touch the board at all. Would be wonderful, because it's been a very, very long time. In fact, last time I did it with Nick Launay, that's the very last time I worked with anybody other than myself. And that was a long time ago.
Well, it's interesting because like producing and like engineering and kind of being in that back seat of things is such like kind of a higher big picture thought of what you're looking at and where it's got to go, and like what exactly it is. It's a different it's a different headspace to be analyzing things in that way. Because as someone who records a lot, like I really get caught up in the performance of what I just did. Does that like,
Right.
and you're like, did I get that right? And you start to eat away at these little things. Well, let me try it again. I said the word a little funky. Let me make sure I print out. And like you get caught up in those little details. Whereas a producer and like an engineer, you're looking at the bigger thing, and that's such a different view.
It is. I mean, I definitely, certainly, because there's one sort of drawback with being the sole progenitor of the music, in that sometimes I won't obsess enough about something.
Yeah.
So although it's kind of charming sometimes to have certain fluffs, when you notice it and it's already been mastered and put out,
yeah,
that then becomes I mean, I've learned to move on from that because it happens so often.
yeah,
But then it
yeah.
becomes like a thing. Like even if there's a click on the edit that you didn't find and it's very low in the mix and nobody in the world would ever notice, but you do.
Yeah, yeah. I totally get that, and that's one of those things. Like the other, I work at an art gallery as well in Cleveland, and
Mhm.
I had a master, and I sent it to this guy in Austin. He works a studio called Dream Studios, and he sent me. He's like, you know what? I really liked reverb on it too. So here's 2 takes of it. I'm like, oh no, I don't need this decision right now. So I'm bringing people
Uh-huh.
in my van. I'm like, what do you think? Does the reverb change it? And the answer is like, it sounds like the same song.
Right.
It's like one of those things you get caught up as someone behind the scenes in trying to figure out.
Well, I work with the guy called Robert Margouleff. He co-produced "End of the Line" first song, and "Secret" was the other song he
Nice.
co-produced.
Both very catchy.
And thank you very much. "End of the Line" is currently Grammy nominated. Actually,
Congrats. That's awesome.
thank you very much. It's a very surprising thing to be, considered in that context, because I would never have ever imagined me being amongst, the Keshas and Doja Cats of the world. But yeah, something he taught me, which was really interesting, because obviously he worked with Stevie Wonder back in the day,
Yeah.
and Oingo Boingo and Devo and all those guys. And he told me, what you're trying to do with a recording, instead of using sort of like, reverbs on everything and trying to craft these like individual sounds, what you're doing essentially as a producer is you're putting the music into a sonic space for a listener. So the best way to listen would be on headphones nowadays,
Right.
because, back in the day when it's all records and things like that, that was the only way you could listen. But now on headphones, you're trying to place each instrument in a space. And it is up to you whether that instrument stays in its space or whether it has special effects. But you have to be very judicious about where you choose those effects to be and when they come and what they're doing and where's going around, what things are moving around the head. And I'm still not that great at that. He is spectacularly good at that. Like, I'm in awe of his abilities, because he's 80 something and he's sharp as a tack, and I love the guy. He's a real sweetheart. But he put that very succinctly to me. It's like, okay, so are you a band in a room standing in specific places, or are you a sonic soundscape, or are you a movie soundtrack? Like, you've got to decide what you're doing with your music. And honestly, with me now, I'm going back to the idea of just being raw and just having a guitar on that side, a guitar on that side, a keyboard in the middle, bass and drums, and a vocal, and then maybe the backing vocalists are far out to the right. Like, really sort of think judiciously about that, and then trim everything else. Like, make sure you don't have too much stuff going on, because then you can focus on what's important. And to be honest, I'm learning that for most of my stuff, the song is important. So if I can play that song with an acoustic guitar and just deal with that, then I don't need to build these big soundscapes around it. And I have been doing that. So I'm trying to back away from that a little bit.
But I think,
And
that's a really good lesson. And to like think of it that way, because it's almost like in that way where you like start playing guitar or something. You're like, I need to learn how to do the licks and how to play fast, and like it's really about taking away. And it's interesting because you kind of hinted at that earlier with that taking that keyboard or putting the Rhodes in and then taking that other part out. Like, so even starting to think like that is like that's a really profound, because I've never really kind of thought of it like, are you putting someone in this headspace that you're going to hear? You know what I mean? Like, you think about where you're placing everything in a mix, but maybe not as much of creating an atmosphere in that sense.
yeah, I mean, you need to think, what are you trying to achieve with the song, like lyrically and vocally in some ways? It's like, are you trying to seduce somebody? Are you trying to berate somebody? Are you trying to express sadness? Like, this is another thing. It's like you're choosing instrumentation as well related to that. Like, there's a song on the album which I think is one of my best songs I've ever written, called Head Up High, and it's a very sad song, but it's intimate. It is a, an internal monologue that is designed to kind of like it's a sad encouragement. It's an exhortation to just get through this next bit. And so the instrumentation had to be intimate and warm. And then I gave it to somebody else to mix it. It's one of only 2 songs that were mixed. Sorry, it's not. There's 4 songs that were mixed by other people, but this is one of the other 2 songs that is mixed by a friend of mine, and he took it to this totally other production space, which I love, and it sounds great. But I was hoping to keep it very dry and intimate and all that stuff, and he didn't. And there's lots of ocean analogies, so clearly, if the ocean is in the lyric, there should probably be oceans of reverb.
Right, some wetness
was
there.
right.
Yeah. Is being that intimate in like that kind of where it was at when you wrote it? Is that why you sent it to someone else to mix? Like, because as a do it all yourself, one person stop. Like to have that. I've experienced. Let me put it this way: I've experienced working with someone else. They kind of help me check myself a little bit when I get caught up in like that kind of tunnel of trying to focus on one thing. Having someone else be like, no, that's fine. Let's focus on this part now. It's going to help that other part. Just having some other outside input and direction. Do you find yourself doing that when it gets to be like almost too intimate?
Not really in this case. I mean, the reason I was sort of I wanted to hand it over is because, firstly, he's great at mixing. He's a good guy. He owed me one, so it was a free mix. Well, it wasn't a free mix, but one that he owed me in the pipe. So, and I just wanted, I had a very specific idea of it, and I also I played the drums on it myself, and then I asked his associate, who we have another project that I sing for and play guitar on, but the drummer is essentially Nathan's good friend. So I got the drummer to put a drum beat on it, and because it was his drummer and he is fantastic at mixing live drums, I took all my live drums off, gave him the mix with that drummer. So, because they were associates and he knew how to work with his kit and his miking techniques and all that stuff. So there's a very technical reason for giving him the mix. And, my mix is very, very different. It's massively different. I mean, a layperson couldn't tell because it's the same song, but
Right. But if you go into knowing what you've done behind it and thinking about it for so long, you're gonna know.
Yeah. I mean, it's and also there's choices like this particular snare reverbs, for example, or treatments that I didn't use and probably wouldn't use. And I listened. I mean, I got the mix back and I was not really into it. And then I ran it by my friends and I got used to it. And I was like, actually, this is great because it's different. Because a lot of the stuff on the album I mix, and I'm not a great mixer. I mean, I'm not the worst mixer in the world, but I'm not great. So to have something that shines on top, like End of the Line, Secret, Head Up High, and Darkling You, they shine because they're mixed by somebody else. And they, they're just more effectively better mixed than mine. So I guess it's like, it's an honor to have these, true professionals working on the stuff. I'm just, sometimes I get too stuck in it. Yeah. My head is too close that I don't know what I'm doing wrong. So it's just all this mess in my head. Like I'm trying to put loads of bass in this one synth sound, clashing with my bass line, and but that's a cool bass.
Yeah. Well, when you get into it, one thing that I always question is just like when learning a little bit about neuroscience, right? The more you hear a song, the more you accept what it is, and your brain starts to expect what it's just heard. So from the first time, if it doesn't fit, that's probably the most honest opinion you're going to get. But the more you listen to it, your brain starts to, oh no, that's how it's supposed to sound because you've heard it a lot. You build up this like expectations that are no longer surprises, but are slowly becoming ingrained. And like, so the Gestalt expectation theory, like, is kind of how they theorize our brain why it likes music because it predicts what's about to happen, and when it's right, it's like dopamine spike. Um,
Right.
so when you do that with your own mix, right? This is where I keep.
Uh-huh.
This is my own quandary for myself. Like when I'm listening to something and really getting, you know what? Now I'm all right with it because I heard it 9 times.
Right.
Did I
Right.
trick myself into accepting what at first I would never have accepted?
I,
Is you know what I mean?
oh, I know exactly what you mean. There's also it also works with certain songs. Like, the
Yeah.
first time I heard "Loving the Alien" by Bowie, and that was the song which really sort of like cemented my love of Bowie, because everything is so weirdly disjointed sonically, like harmonically. It doesn't work. It shouldn't work because there's all sorts of like flipping from major to minor, and like it's not a standard chord sequence at all. But once it's in, this happens with a few Elbow songs too. I don't know whether you know the band Elbow, but once you're familiar with the song, it is absolutely impossible to imagine not having heard it.
Right. Right.
Like it, and by that point, you congratulate yourself. You find yourself smart enough to know what's happening, and I feel like it's a self-congratulatory dopamine rush. There's like an added layer to that.
But that's when I get so caught up with, like, if I'm listening to a mix or a master of a thing, am I accepting it because I've tricked myself into accepting it? And if I put it out, or is this the honest opinion of the first listen? You know what I mean? Like,
But it doesn't really
I
matter.
you're right. You're right.
At the end of the day, it's like if you hope, I mean, what we hope is that people will keep on listening to our songs, till legacy.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are certain Cure songs where the first time I heard them, they were really jarring,
Yeah.
and then 10 times in, it's perfectly fine. And there's a Radiohead B-side called Palo Alto,
Right.
which do you know the song?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And the guitar in it is way too loud. But now it's part of the whole fabric of that song. So it's like, okay, well, that they did that, and that's fine.
You're
Well,
right. You're right.
there's also, I don't know whether like Grimes or not.
I'm not familiar with Grimes. I have to check in.
Oh, she's great, and there's this one song, Reality.
Okay.
She got her laptop stolen, and this one song she released it as a sort of like thank you, because she had the demo mix, and it was absolutely beautiful. What a wonderful song! Like, it was really lovely song, and she'd just come off her last album, which was kind of demo-y sounding, and so this song was a stopgap before her sort of properly mixed debut kind of thing. And I used to listen to it with my daughter all the time when she was first a little tiny girl, and we loved it, and we'd listen to this song, we'd bop around with it, and it was Reality demo, and then she released the album with Reality, the finished song, and it was just bad. It just wasn't good. But the demo was on at the end, because even though it's not sounding perfectly how it should sound, it's not punchy, it's just a demo, but because it's perfect as it is, and then we're used to it, the better produced, more punchy version isn't
it?
It doesn't do the dopamine. Doesn't do it. It's ruined the proper version for you. It always happens with me with demos. Like, I have a demo of End of the Line that I did before I worked with it with Margalef. I've been asked to do a vinyl record with a Mexican record label, coincidentally the same one that's working with David's new album, and so I've put the demo version of End of the Line on it because it's great. I listened to it the other day for the first time in 5 years or whatever, and it's different, but it sounds, and I'm really happy with it.
It's like when you first start diving in the records, you're like, I wonder why they put the demo on here. And until you start doing that, and that makes so much sense because you get so ingrained with like the demo of it and hearing it done for the first time and really analyzing like the performance and what you need to do for the next thing. But there starts that picture becomes so clear once you spend so much time with it. And that act makes so much more sense now when you put a demo on the end of the record or put out, you know what I mean? Or put that one out instead of the, like, the I don't know, better produced take, like we're saying.
Right.
But Julian, thank you so much for your time, man. This has been a super pleasurable conversation.
Well, Dave, I appreciate talking with you, and I'm so thrilled that you like the record, because
I
obviously
love
you've
it.
got
It's so good.
a depth of musical knowledge, which is very cool. And I used to teach autistic kids too.
No way. Yeah?
And I did rock school.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, this is like years and years ago when I was in
Yeah.
England. It's very rewarding but draining sometimes.
Oh, man, I'm so tired right now. Like,
But no, I appreciate that aspect of you. I think I'm very much respectful of it. So
Oh, thank you so much.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.